Hi, I'm Rick Gauthier. Come and meet the teachers and mentors who inspired little Ricky, the lad from Otter Lake Adolescent Adventures. It's the fine folks like these individuals who changed the world to make it a better place. Enjoy this free sample of Gauthier's second collection, Little Ricky, the Lad from Otter Lake Adolescent Adventures. Selling now in full collections and individual short stories, all available in paperback, ebook, or audiobook. Find Little Ricky on both Amazon and Kobo.
Mrs. Bretzloff was one of the newest teachers to join the teaching faculty at Victoria Avenue High School. She had a young, happy spirit and bounds of energy. If one had to guess her age in 1979, one would guess she was about 30 to 35 years old. Because she used the abbreviation Mrs., everyone simply assumed she was married. However, this fact was never known by her students. Physically, she was a very attractive lady. She was of a medium height and build, and maintained a healthy weight. She was slightly shorter than what was considered normal for a woman of her age, but that attribute was lessened when she wore her usual 2-inch chunky heels. Her face was that of a perfect smiling cherub. She had a clear complexion, almond eyes, soft eyebrows, a delicate nose, rounded cheeks, elegant chin, and a pretty little smile that looked like a tiny pink ribbon tied up into a festive bow. She was nearsighted and as such wore very stylish, round-framed, amber-colored eyeglasses. Her rich, full hair was soft and golden. Her locks were tightly curled, but no one knew if she had naturally curly hair, or if she would have her tresses curled at the hairdresser's shop. Her pretty face, though never needing any makeup, was usually done to include a light blush on her cheekbones, some mascara and soft-colored eyeshadow, and a touch of lipstick to brighten her lips. Mrs. Bretzloff occasionally wore fashionable dresses of varied colors, but she usually preferred to wear slacks and feminine frilly blouses when she was at school. Being fashionable, she often selected the most pleasing accessories and jewelry, and it was never overdone. Mrs. Ida Perry, a beloved teacher from Victoria Avenue High School, taught her students 3 subjects: science, biology, and math. Though she was much loved and respected by her former students, she instilled fear in any current group of teens that she had under her tutelage. She was brilliant, but ran a very tight ship and tolerated no nonsense. Absolutely no nonsense. Should a student be out of line or not put in their work, a fast and furious angry flare would rage up, and the situation was dealt with effectively and efficiently. No one fooled around in Mrs. Perry's classes. Physically, she was a very striking woman. She was tall and slim and maintained excellent posture. She had broad shoulders and a sturdy frame with slightly rounded hips, slender waist, and average bust line. If one were to make a comparison of her physique to anyone else in the world, her body was as interesting and unique as that of the English fashion model Twiggy. That is where that comparison ends, because Mrs. Perry was no blonde beauty. She was rather the perfect mix of 2 raven-haired gorgeous actresses, Miss Elizabeth Taylor and Miss Liza Minnelli. Her nearly black short hair was coiffed perfectly to mimic the style and fashion of Miss Minnelli's in the Broadway hit Cabaret. Her dark, piercing eyes glistened when she spoke, or when she listened intently to a student's inquiry. It was almost like they were covered in a very thin layer of sparkling ice. These amazing eyes were highlighted by dark-trimmed eyebrows and long, curled black lashes. Though her long, straight nose was slightly larger than that of Miss Elizabeth Taylor's, it suited her long and oval face very well. Her mouth was thin with very light pink lips, and when she smiled, the cutest little dimples would visit her cheeks. She had a pale complexion, but this suited her well. It made her look very striking, especially with her midnight black hair. Mrs. Perry wore very little makeup, but occasionally might have added just slight touches of blush, eyeshadow, or lipstick. However, makeup was never needed to enhance her natural beauty. Mrs. Perry rarely wore dresses or skirts, but on occurrence would surprise her students and her husband, Mr. Perry, another teacher working at Victoria High, in showing off her long and slender legs. From her varied wardrobe, her typical favorites to wear were turtleneck sweaters, feminine vests, and sensible slacks. With her tall frame, she rarely wore high-heel shoes. She usually sported low-heel, comfortable loafers. As she was a practical lady, she also wore minimal jewelry. Normally, a wristwatch, simple earrings, a simple necklace, and her wedding ring would be the extent of any accessories. Mrs. Maheral's most outstanding feature was her soothing, deep, rich voice. When she spoke, when she told a story, she magically used words, tones, and inflection to immediately draw any listener into her tales. She had amassed a huge and impressive vocabulary and had the talent to select and use the right words at the right time. When she spoke, her whole being came alive as she delivered her narrative. Her facial expressions portrayed the precise emotions of each moment. Her eyes, wide and bright, reflected the depth of her knowledge and her unfurled desire to unleash that erudition. Her smiles, frowns, gasps, or positioning of her lips conveyed appropriate surprise, fear, contempt, happiness, sadness, anxiety, distaste, or concealment, having each mannerism flawlessly enhance delivery of historical events. When Ricky looked at Mrs. Maheral, the first individual that came to mind was the ancient Egyptian queen Neferuaten Nefertiti, a sovereign of the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt and wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten. This strong couple from the past were best known for a religious revolution in which they worshipped one god only, Aten, or the sun disk. Ricky reflected for a moment on the wonders and mysteries of ancient Egypt that the class had studied just 2 weeks ago. Mrs. Maheral was equally as beautiful as Nefertiti. Her long, oval face with pointed chin gave her an air of royalty. Sharp, defined eyebrows showcased sparkling eyes. A long, thin nose and high cheekbones highlighted the beauty of her face. Though she was about 40 to 45 years old, her ever-smiling face never let a solemn wrinkle develop on her soft skin. The history teacher was a woman of normal height and weight, having slightly rounded shoulders and hips. Her fashion was deemed cool for the times because short but not too short skirts and colorful paisley blouses were her favorites. She wore little makeup, if any at all, but did enjoy and wear chunky and funky jewelry, all perfect for the fashion trends to celebrate the end of the 1970s. Father Costello was a kind and pious man. He was the parish priest of a local community called Bristol, where he also lived at the rectory. In addition, he was a full-time teacher at Victoria Avenue High School and taught religion, law, and typing to most grades. Further, for most of his years at the school, he was also on staff to provide guidance to students. Physically, he was a handsome fellow with a sturdy frame. His love of playing hockey with the Flying Fathers kept him strong and agile. He stood about 5 feet 10 inches. He ate well, and his love of foods of all varieties showed in his slightly rounded tummy, cheeks, and chin. However, the man was not fat. He simply carried a little bit more weight than most men his age. The jolly chaplain did keep good posture, as he always stood up straight with a broad back, despite his rounded shoulders and thick neck. Father Costello seemed to always have the wind at his back, because he walked quickly all the time, wanting to never waste any time in getting from here to there. The only times he was not moving quickly is when he was sitting, giving a lecture, or listening intently to every word being offered to him. He did not only listen well, but also had the amazing ability to interpret what was heard and able to give solid advice or meaningful responses every time. He was a man in his mid-30s or early 40s. Because of his young age, he had no gray in his hair or any wrinkles on his face. His head was topped with a lovely crop of black wavy hair, cut short and styled like that of a true gentleman, but still fanciful because of his Tintin-like swoop of hair at the front. He wore no beard or mustache, but did sport long, bushy sideburns, but not quite like those of a late 70s Elvis Presley. Father Costello had deep, rich brown eyes, soft eyebrows, a firm nose, and thick, always smiling lips. His caring eyes were magical, because they were always filled with emotion that nearly spoke a language of their very own. Being a priest, Father Costello was not the snappiest dresser. However, he was always dressed in the most appropriate formal outfit of black slacks, dress shirt, suit jacket, and white clerical collar. Nevertheless, on occasion he would spice up his look with a colorful cardigan buttoned-up sweater. All in all, he truly was a remarkable man. Mrs. Cora Ringrose was a loved and respected teacher at Victoria Avenue High School. In 1979, she taught French and guidance. She was perfectly suited for both subject matters. Her knowledge of the French language was impeccable. She was a francophone, but used her married English name Ringrose, rather than her maiden name. This was the custom for all married women in West Quebec. Being a French-speaking lady from birth, and after accomplishing her formal university studies of the French language, she was indeed a well-versed French teacher. Her in-depth knowledge of social and psychological topics gained both at university and with years of experience in the workforce enabled her to be a very effective guidance teacher and counselor. Mrs. Ringrose was a fun and loving teacher. She enjoyed joking and laughing with her students. Her quirky, unique expressions, including her impressions of Marcel Marceau's mime looks, and particularly his most famous Art of Silence face, would send her students into bouts of chuckles. Cora Ringrose was kind and very supportive of all of her students. She did not like to see any of her pupils struggle and would often give up her own personal time to help them achieve their goals, even if it meant helping the student to see that taking smaller steps to get to the bigger prize was a goal in itself. Being a teacher of linguistics, she was an excellent listener. She had to not only listen to the pronunciation of what was being said, but also the true, sometimes hidden messages being given to her by her students. Physically, Mrs. Ringrose was a very attractive woman. She was a mature woman in her mid to late 50s. She easily could have been a movie star from a past decade or perhaps a fashion model. She was always well dressed, wearing the most fashionable outfits, but often preferred a lady's crisp business suit and feminine silky or satin blouses. She had a diamond-shaped face with high, strong cheekbones and a long, prominent chin. This beautiful face was the perfect setting to show off her most amazing dark and mysterious eyes. Above these sparkling orbs, she had soft, trimmed eyebrows. Her wide forehead and strong jawline framed her look, giving her the perfect balance of confidence and beauty. Her delicate nose was set perfectly between her eyes. Her wide, thick-lipped, toothy smile, with rows of bright white teeth, was most definitely her finest physical attribute. Her hair was dark, thick, and wavy, nearly curly. She kept her locks nicely styled, always in the latest styles. Mrs. Ringrose wore delicate shades of makeup, having usually applied some blusher on her cheeks, soft color on her eyes, and a bright red lipstick. Every woman her age, as she did, was trying to conceal her age with the application of a good foundation and top-quality makeup. She did it successfully because she had a young and fresh look. All in all, she was an amazing person and an active supporter of everything she believed in. Mr. Vernon Carroll was by far the tallest person at Victoria Avenue High School, even though he never stood up straight and walked slightly stooped as he strode along. As a result, everyone thought that Mr. Paul Maguire was slightly taller than Mr. Carroll. In reality, both gentlemen were probably equal in height, but everyone expected Mr. Carroll hid his true height to make Mr. Maguire feel like he was tallest. Mr. Carroll was a tall, dark, and handsome man. He was tall indeed, with broad shoulders and a solid frame. His true height was probably well over 6 feet, if not 6 feet 2 inches or more. He was a man in good physical shape. He was not bulging with muscles like Mr. Universe, but definitely was solidly built, with no visible sign of extra body fat, including the dreaded potbellies or spare tire bulges at the guts and midriffs of some men. His family name Carroll probably indicated that he had Irish roots. Carroll is a surname which is a derivative of the Gaelic names O'Searbail and Searball, both meaning fierce in battle. This trait was definitely true for Mr. Carroll, because he would face all challenges head-on and never give up. His given name Vernon was a unique name, an English name meaning alder tree. His name Vernon was perfectly suited for him, because he did indeed have both the strength and flexibility of an alder tree. His face was almond-shaped, having dark, rich, masculine features. His forehead was wide and clear, centered over brown, piercing eyes, mysterious orbs filled with endless amounts of both curiosity and wisdom, rich, thick, manly eyebrows that moved up and down depending upon the man's charming multiple expressions, sat above those dark, wide eyes. He had strong cheekbones and a solid jawline with a pointed chin. His chin showed off one of his most distinctive features, a slight shallow cleft. His nose was solid and set centrally and attractively in the middle of his face. His mouth was formed with a thick lower lip and a slightly thinner upper lip, both always formed to grin or smile in the most delightful way. He was always clean-shaven, but some of the gals often wondered what he might have looked like with a beard or mustache. This tall and fetching teacher was a lucky man, because despite his age of mid to late 30s to early 40s, he had a full crop of nearly black, thick hair. He styled it magnificently, combed flat, parted up top, long at the back and sides, and barbered in the most elegant, chic Elvis Presley style worn by the superstar in the late 70s. Mr. Carroll was always well dressed. His signature look always included some form of a plaid suit jacket, well-pressed slacks, a crisp shirt, an elegant tie, and spotless polished leather shoes. Though the man was big and tall, he was the gentlest giant. His mood and personality were always positive and happy. In fact, he would often whistle while he walked. Though he kept a wealth of knowledge inside, acquired through his many traveled paths in his life thus far, he approached each day, each person he met, and each moment with intelligent thought, mixed perfectly with his own special wit. His sometimes corny jokes would send his varied flocks of students into reams of laughter. Definitely, Mr. Vernon Carroll was a teacher that very few of his students would ever forget. Mr. Kenneth Dubeau, a much treasured teacher, worked at Victoria Avenue High School for many years. Known mostly as an excellent English teacher, he also taught courses from the scientific curriculum. If one had to guess his age in the late 1970s, one would assume he was probably about 33, but his fun and fanciful, most pleasant personality made him seem only in his mid to late 20s. Mr. Dubeau was the kind of guy that everyone, both young and old, wanted to have as their very best chum. In fact, Mr. Dubeau did have a very best chum at high school. He and Mr. Carroll were the best of friends, and often anyone walking the halls of the school could find them over the lunch break or during a spare period, hunched over a chessboard. Both men would face off in competition, deep in thought, as they tried to figure out their next move or that of their opponent. Physically, Mr. Dubeau was a handsome fellow. He was small-framed but strong. His physical build was typical of any gentleman of French heritage, not too muscular, but in great shape. His height was probably about 5 foot 6 inches, and he surely did not weigh much more than 150 pounds. His proportions were well balanced. He had a trim torso, average brawny legs, slightly rounded shoulders, and strong arms. His fetching oval face made him look saintly. He had a high forehead that got half covered over with his full crop of light brown, shiny, and healthy hair, normally parted from the side. As it was the late 70s, he kept his hair long at the sides and back, in line with the hairstyles of the day. He had a solid, straight, thin nose, centered perfectly under his mysterious brown eyes. It is true what they say, that the eyes are the windows to the soul, because his eyes beautifully reflected his inner emotions. His face was always clean-shaven, a fact that most of the gals appreciated, because they could better see his warm and cheerful smile formed by a thick lower lip and a slightly thinner upper lip. Mr. Dubeau's work attire was always chic. He was well dressed in neatly pressed dress pants, a crisp, fresh shirt, and one of his beautifully styled neckties. On occasion, he would wear suit jackets, but he often opted to wear cozy cardigan sweaters. His sweaters definitely softened his look and made him very approachable. Mr. Dubeau was an intelligent and charming teacher. His fun and light-spirited personality made it possible for all of his students to like him. He was kind-hearted and generous of his time with each of the guys or gals in his classes. Gladys Conway, née Gauthier, was the third child and eldest daughter of Rahel Gauthier and Gertrude Blaskey, born and raised in the Sandy Creek area, up the Pickenock Road, just north of Otter Lake. Tragically, as a young girl at age 8, Gladys lost her father when he died from medical complications due to an injury he had sustained after an accident in late September of 1937. However, despite this early trauma, with guidance and support given to her from her widowed mother, Gladys developed into the strong, intelligent, and vivacious woman she was today. At an early age, she learned that hard work always paid off. She and her siblings, her eldest brother Eddie, her brother Cyril, Ricky's father, and her baby sister Beatrice, all supported each other through the difficult times that came after their father's death, including poverty, the last years of the Depression, the Second World War, and the challenging years of the 50s and 60s. Regardless of any barriers put before her, Gladys Gauthier discovered ways to find success in all that she tried. As a girl and teen, she did well in school. She was crafty and maintained a variety of interests like reading, cooking, gardening, and sewing. She had a warm and outgoing personality and was instantly liked by anyone who had the pleasure of meeting her. When she was happy, one could simply feel her joy in her look of big, beautiful smiles, eyes that lit up the room with bright energy, and the musical, most pleasant sound of her voice, especially when she was laughing. After completing her high school, she found work locally, then in the city. As a young woman, she eventually moved to Ottawa. When living and working there, she equally found true love and a kind and caring husband. Together, side by side, they built a beautiful life together, including raising 6 wonderful children. As a family, their homes, first in St. Eugene, then in Van Cleek Hill, were filled with love and support for family and community. Physically, Ricky found his aunt stunningly beautiful, and he was certain that it was the mix of her personality and her beauty that wooed his Uncle Vincent Conway to marry her in 1950. Gladys Conway was about 5 foot 6 inches tall. She had a rounded, voluptuous figure. Most of her life, she maintained a weight a bit heavier than what she would have liked. She tried to battle her gains with a variety of diets and exercise, but her love of enjoying life and eating tasty foods won out. Despite this, she pushed away any notion that big was bad. She celebrated her size and rather accepted that she was perfect just the way she was. Though she may not have had the body of a slim and trim fashion model, she definitely had the allure of one because of her most attractive face. She had big, bright blue eyes, long and curled eyelashes, neatly trimmed, delicate eyebrows, clear and soft skin, a cute feminine nose, and full rounded cheeks and chin. Her ever-smiling mouth was formed by 2 soft, full lips. Her hair was rich and thick. It curled naturally and was the perfect color of both golden leaves and dark blonde straw. She wore her hair short and beautifully fashioned in a hairstyle contour that any starlet from the top movies of the day would have wanted. Her choices in clothing were chic and stylish. She often opted to wear well-fitted slacks and colorful blouses when visiting Otter Lake, but would also wear lovely light and airy dresses on more formal occasions, or to go to church. Her accessories were minimal, but could include some trendy costume jewelry or a beautiful silk scarf to wrap around her neck. Her shoes or sandals always matched her outfits, as did her purses. Often she would wear low-heel comfortable shoes, but had no fear of putting on a pair of high heels once in a while. To her family and her friends, she was a true treasure. Mrs. Louisa Beauregard, a trusted neighbor and friend to all members of the Gauthier family, was well respected by young Ricky. He had looked up to her since his early childhood as a tiny tyke, known affectionately as Little Ricky. Occasionally, Mrs. Beauregard was his babysitter, and it was during these early years that Ricky had discovered how warm and nice she was. Ricky, at present day, though he was now developing into a sensitive young man, still looked up to this fine lady. Mrs. Beauregard was born Louisa Godain. The Godains were a lovely local Francophone family from the area. However, like most families in the Otter Lake area, her family and she were functionally bilingual, speaking both French and English very well. She loved and kept close relationships with her parents and siblings throughout her life. In the 1950s, she married her handsome Florimond Beauregard, and they started their life together as husband and wife. Over the years, they built a nice life together, including raising 6 children, establishing and keeping a loving home, running a thriving auto mechanic garage, operating a little diner-styled restaurant within their home, and later managing a respectable and safe foster home for disadvantaged boys. Mrs. Beauregard was a wise and intelligent woman. She was crafty and could easily improvise to find a solution to fix any problem or fix anything. It seemed she possessed the ability to see the solution ahead of the problem, and as such always took clear and swift actions to get things done. Though she loved to laugh and did have the cutest little cackle, she often needed to keep a stern and firm temperament to ensure everyone got along and followed the rules, especially when she had to keep several excitable lads in line as their foster mother. Louisa Beauregard had many talents. She was an excellent cook. Though preparing fine or delicate foods was not her thing, she could easily and expertly make healthy and fulfilling meals using the good core old-fashioned staples, like homemade bread, fresh meats or fish, garden-grown vegetables, and plenty of local fruits. When running the restaurant as chief cook, she had many happy return clients, especially for her breakfast, burgers, stews, and homemade desserts. Ricky especially appreciated her most delectable ice cream sundaes. It was in her diner where Ricky had experienced such a treat for the very first time, and it instantly became one of his favorite desserts. Mrs. Beauregard could mend and sew. She was good with plants, and as such, most certainly had a green thumb. Her astute ability to plan and manage the household budget made all of the Beauregard ventures successful. Physically, Louisa Beauregard, even now in her late 40s or early 50s, was very beautiful. Ricky felt she looked regal because she was the perfect blend of 2 princesses. She definitely had the best features of the Queen's sister, Princess Margaret, and of the Queen's daughter, Princess Anne. Mrs. Beauregard stood about 5.5 feet tall. Though a bit heavier than she was in her youth, she was not overweight. She had a well-balanced form with long, slender legs, well-proportioned upper body, with firm, strong arms and hands. She was a hard worker, and her hard work gave her strength. She had nicely rounded hips and an ample bosom, but did have quite rounded shoulders and a curved spine. Nonetheless, despite the wear and tear on her back and being middle-aged, she still had a very beautiful face. She had a long and slender neck, topped by her lovely oval face. She had deep, mysterious eyes, set below nicely kept eyebrows, and soft, wispy eyelashes. Her high cheekbones angled perfectly to highlight her long, elegant nose. She had nice, thick, full lips, and when placed together, they formed the most adorable smile. Mrs. Beauregard was blessed with a head filled with thick, rich, dark hair. Though she let her hair grow long, she always wore it pinned up into an elegant shape atop her head. Mrs. Beauregard's fashion was built upon common sense. She routinely would wear simple, durable slacks and blouses, and on occasion a pretty dress. She was not one for fancy fare, but on special occasions would be equally comfortable in a stylish dress and high-heel shoes. Mrs. Beauregard, being a sensible and no-frills woman, rarely wore makeup. She did not need it because she had natural beauty. However, on those aforementioned special occasions, she may have applied a bit of blusher, eyeshadow, or lipstick. Overall, Ricky and all those that knew her felt she was a special lady. Ricky believed that with all of her good looks and fine qualities, Mrs. Beauregard could easily be the Queen's sister or daughter. Mr. Philip Perry was a pretty cool teacher at Victoria Avenue High School. He was kind, supportive, genuine, and a very good listener. He was always thoughtful when considering a student's perspective. To him, it was important to understand the student's thinking, and as such, he always took the time, with the right probing questions, to figure this out. This amazing extra step, the making of a connection with the student, while not always taken by many teachers, enabled Mr. Perry's lessons to be so much more impactful. Everyone liked Mr. Perry because he was a happy and upbeat person. His endless positive attitude was infectious. Mr. Perry was a very intelligent man. He taught the complicated subjects of math, algebra, Quebec civil law, and bookkeeping. He was so astute in these topics that no student could ever trip him up with any unexpected, far-out, or complicated question. Well, nearly never. He was always ready to take on the challenge, and if he did not immediately know the answer, he would take the time to research it and happily share what he found with that student, or anyone else interested, which often included the whole class. His chosen profession was that of a teacher. He was excellent in this role, and it was evident to everyone by his big grinning smiles that he enjoyed his work. It brought joy to him, because every time he caught that magic flash in a student's eyes, telling him that they got it, it made him happy to know that he was able to impart important knowledge that would help any pupil succeed in his or her endeavors. Physically, Mr. Phil Perry was considered one of the hottest men at the school, especially by most of the girls, his charming wife, Mrs. Ida Perry, and even some of the guys. All that to say, everyone found Mr. Perry to be a handsome man. He was very fortunate to have a movie star male lead's tall, dark, and handsome traits. But what made Mr. Perry more attractive beyond his physical looks was more importantly his warm, friendly, caring, and helpful nature. Mr. Perry stood about 6 feet tall. He was a solid man with a strong, muscular frame. He was not rippling with muscles like some dudes who work out at a gym every day, but was indeed strong and fit. He had a sturdy, trim torso with a flat stomach and nicely toned pectorals. His arms and legs looked powerful and strong, like solid branches of a mature hardwood tree. Mr. Perry had a wide, attractive oval face, perfectly centered over a thick neck and broad shoulders. Mr. Perry had big, bright, dark eyes that flickered with excitement when he spoke, or became dark, mysterious pools when he was listening. These eyes were topped by thick, manly eyebrows, which were the same color of his hair. Mr. Perry had dark, rich, curly hair, and he wore it longer, with a crop of curls covering his forehead and ears. The man's nose was straight and attractively centered on his face. Mr. Perry was always clean-shaven, but some of the gals often wondered what he might have looked like with a mysterious sea captain's beard and mustache. By sporting a clean-shaven face, it highlighted a most delightful smile. This smile was formed by 2 striking lips and 2 rows of bright white teeth. As was the fashion and trend for male teachers, Mr. Perry was always well dressed. Though he may have found comfort in jeans, t-shirts, and loafers on the weekends, when at school he always dressed as the professional man that he was in appropriate business attire. Typically, Mr. Perry wore well-pressed and fitted dress pants, crisp, fresh dress shirts, a stylish suit jacket or blazer, and usually matching leather belts and shoes. He omitted wearing a tie as the only exception to being formally dressed. His preference was to leave a few of the top buttons of his shirt undone, giving himself more freedom from being strangled by a tie. This man was a favorite teacher to many who attended Victoria Avenue High School. He was an excellent teacher to his students, and good friend and colleague to all the faculty and staff at the school. Definitely Mr. Perry's current and former students count him as one of the very best teachers they ever had. He will be remembered and thanked for decades for his role in helping each student find and fulfill their achievements and thrive in all that they do in their individual and special lives. Mrs. Esselpeth Russell was a much-loved and respected teacher whose career spanned decades. The students at Victoria Avenue High School were extremely fortunate to have her as their history teacher. Because of her and her amazing abilities as an educator, each of these individuals had grown and matured to become well-informed members of Canadian society, each deeply enriched with in-depth knowledge about the beautiful country in which they lived. Mrs. Russell, a seasoned teacher, was a true lady through and through. She was proper, polite, gentle, friendly, and kind. She was a wise woman in her late 50s or perhaps early to mid-60s. She possessed profound knowledge of historical events and was a gifted storyteller. As she told her many tales, she literally would come alive with excitement and would nearly embody the character from history who she was describing. In some magical way, she had the ability to transform what she taught her students to be so real and so genuine that it seemed she had some mystical connection to every historical figure from the other realm. Her descriptions of events and of people were so good that one would think she actually partook in the proceedings herself or personally knew the individual she was describing. Mrs. Russell was the type of grand lady that every student wished they had as their very own special auntie or as their own unique, cherished, doting, and caring grandmother. However, Mrs. Russell was no old granny. She was stylish, on the ball, and youthful. Mrs. Russell did indeed have style and always looked great. She was not a tall woman. She probably measured about 5 feet, 5 inches tall. She did, however, seem a little bit shorter than that, because she walked slightly stooped due to a rounded curvature of her back. Some women her age develop spine issues due to osteoporosis, and this may have been the case for her. She was not a slender woman, nor was she fat. She held a slightly heavier weight that made her look regal, a weight similar to the Queen Mum's. She had wide hips, and that helped carry any girth that she had. Her legs and arms were well proportioned, and being a true lady, she always had her legs covered in fancy, thick nylon stockings. She never exposed bare legs. Her body generally was well balanced, and she looked and felt healthy. Mrs. Russell had the most beautiful, welcoming face. It was oval with soft, clear skin. She had the most amazing twinkling eyes of medium chestnut brown color. They were deep, probing eyes that lit up when she spoke, or that focused intently when she was listening. Her attractive eyelashes enhanced her eyes and fluttered gently if she felt embarrassed. Above these eyes, these pools of knowledge, she kept nicely rounded, trimmed eyebrows. Her slight feminine nose sat perfectly centered between her full, rounded cheeks. Her jaw angled downwards and ended with a delicate, womanly chin. Though her eyes and her smile were always in competition to be her most alluring feature, it was her mouth and that smile that won out. Her smile was always wide and bright, formed by 2 delicately shaped lips and rows of big, bright teeth. When she smiled, it made anyone nearby feel happy and content. Being a bit conservative and never wanting to go wild with her hair, she kept a very stylish, short page-boy cut. Her shiny, fresh hair was a similar light brown color to that of her soft eyes. It perfectly complemented her eye color, and her hair was worn draped gently over her forehead. In terms of style, Mrs. Russell was always sensibly dressed in the manner that suited her profession as a teacher. Typically, she would wear long skirts that were definitely below the knee, elegant blouses, usually with crisp collars, or tied at the neck with a silky wide ribbon, or comfortable turtleneck sweaters that reached up to just under her chin. On occasion, she may have worn slacks, but this was rare. To complement her ensemble from time to time, she also opted to wear a lady's jacket or fancy cardigan sweaters made of the softest wool. Nothing but sensible shoes were befitting for Mrs. Russell. She wore well-made leather low-heel shoes, always stylish and comfortable. She rarely, if ever, wore high-heeled shoes. In terms of wearing makeup or trying to complement her outfits with many accessories, Mrs. Russell did not seem to be a huge fan. She always had a purse and her reading glasses in their little leather case or suspended from a delicate chain around her neck, but not much more. She wore little makeup, if any, with perhaps some foundation and a light blush against her cheeks. Her jewelry was usually minimized to consist of small clip-on earrings, and occasionally a long gold chain around her neck draped with a stylish pendant. She was an elegant woman, and always dressed for success in her chosen profession. In the views of all of her students, she was a very brilliant and successful teacher. We remember this engaging teacher fondly, and she will forever be a part of her students' individual histories. Mr. John Sproviere was one of the trusted and respected teachers that worked at Victoria Avenue High School in Shawville, Quebec, during the 1970s and early 1980s. He was a dedicated, knowledgeable teacher who taught math, history, geography, and economics to his students. While in the classroom, he came across as a stern and demanding teacher, but his methods pushed his students to reach higher in order for them to succeed. Generally, he was very personable, but with Mr. Sproviere in charge, there was definitely a line drawn between who was the student and who was the teacher. Very few of his students had any issue with this distinction because as teacher, Mr. Sproviere was the man they all trusted. Under his tutelage, they knew they would learn from his teachings. Mr. Sproviere was a brilliant man and wanted to willfully share his great knowledge with all. His teaching methods were sometimes unorthodox and out of the ordinary, but everyone knew that at the end of the term, they would pass his class with great accomplishment. Nearly all students who attended this man's classes would indeed achieve success, because he took the time to nudge his learners to attain high grades at the end of it all, though at times it may have felt somewhat painful to them. Physically, Mr. Sproviere was a good-looking chap. He was no fashion model, but definitely had a look. He was a very professional man and always dressed in appropriate semi-formal attire. Each day, while fulfilling his role as teacher, he was dressed in the most fittingly styled business suits, with matching crisp dress pants and tailored suit jackets. His shirts were always expertly pressed, and he always wore a fashionable tie. The color palette he preferred most was that of dark browns, soft beiges, crisp greens, stylish grays, and navy blues. Equally, he was not one to be akin to wearing boring white shirts, because often he decided to wear those of rich chocolate browns, chalky charcoal grays, or deep amber oranges. Occasionally, he would wear a stark black shirt and a crisp white tie, which made him look slightly like he was one of the Godfather's hitmen. It seemed that Mr. Sproviere splurged when purchasing quality shoes. His feet were always fitted with fine Italian leather shoes in a variety of styles. Both comfort and style were important to him. His face was angular and square. The handsome man had big, dark brown, deep-set eyes. His manly face equally had a solid, straight, centrally set nose between his large, striking eyes. His cheeks were shallow, but these perfectly complemented his square chin and wide forehead. This fetching fellow had thick, full lips and a handsome smile with 2 rows of big white teeth. He preferred a clean-shaven look, and as such never wore a beard or mustache. Because he was nearsighted, he wore a set of very stylish, big-rimmed eyeglasses. His glasses absolutely accented one of his most appealing features, his dark and attractive eyes. Teasingly, some of the students referred to him as the Owl, but this was a great compliment to him because he was indeed a very wise man. Mr. Sproviere was a treasured teacher at Victoria Avenue High School, a true gentleman and mentor that very few of his students will ever forget. Mrs. Helen Duquette, a deeply respected and loved teacher, instilled the values of acceptance and balance, compassion and understanding, creativity and purpose, discipline and trust, knowledge and responsibility, wonder and wisdom, but most of all gratitude to every one of her students. She taught English writing and literature to hundreds of English Catholic students at Victoria Avenue High School for nearly 2 decades, if not longer. She was a seasoned, brilliant teacher who opened up excited eyes of engaged students to the complexities of the English language and its grammatical structures, and more importantly to many literary classics. From Shakespeare, both plays and poetry, to the intriguing study of dramatic plays like The Death of a Salesman by dramatist Arthur Miller and White Fang by author Jack London, she taught them well. The characters, intrigue, and adventure of these tales remain etched in the memories of many of her former students. The lessons taught by telling and studying these amazing stories have helped her students live wise, informed, and happier lives. She had a warm and friendly personality. She engaged with everyone with the same kind, gentle, interested, and engaging manner. One of her most appealing traits was her mellow, soft, and appealing voice. The moment she would speak, one would naturally be drawn into her magic and sit up and listen. No one wanted to miss a word she said. Physically, being a woman in her mid to late 50s, she remained quite attractive, having clear, soft skin and an oval face with appealing, chubby cheeks. She had bright almond-shaped eyes that twinkled when she spoke and sparkled when she laughed. The color of her eyes was of a honey brown, with tiny flecks of gold and green. They were quite amazing, especially because they were amplified by her very stylish, big, round, feminine glasses. Though she was filled with wisdom and deep knowledge, her stylish glasses strengthened this fact since, in those days, mostly very intelligent people wore glasses. Her nose was slight, straight, and perfectly centered on her face. It acted as the ideal bridge to support her eyewear. Her jaw was soft and curved, slightly rounded, and was flawlessly balanced with a delicate chin. Her everlasting smile was enchanting, and was formed by two thin, soft pink lips and two rows of straight, bright white teeth. Her hair was a soft brownish color and was slightly graying. She kept her hair curled and short, and it was expected that she had naturally wavy hair, but probably visited the hairdresser from time to keep her delicate soft curls long-lasting with a perm. Mrs. Duquette was not one to wear a lot of makeup, but probably did wear just a little bit, as most women her age did in those days. She skillfully applied a good foundation, well-blended powders to complement her flesh tones, and a light blush swept upwards from the apples of her cheeks. She did wear a very expensive-looking peachy pink lipstick. Mrs. Duquette was a very professional teacher, and her fashion choices portrayed the true essence of that profession. Her business attire, routinely worn, consisted of long, fashionable skirts and crisply pressed delicate blouses of a variety of pastel colors. It was equally quite common for Mrs. Duquette to wear a lady's jacket or delicately knitted sweater atop her blouse. Once in a while she would wear dresses to school, but usually only on special occasions, or perhaps she would wear lighter dresses made of cotton on very warm days at the end of the school year during the month of June. Her slender legs were always covered in nylon stockings, and she only wore low-heeled leather dress shoes, or on rare occasions nicely styled ladies' sandals. It did not seem that Mrs. Duquette was fond of wearing much jewelry. She did wear small earrings from time to time, or a gold chain with a fancy pendant around her neck. However, the only other accessories that seemed to be worn daily were her wristwatch and her wedding ring. There were several excellent English teachers at Victoria Avenue High School who shared the intricacies of the English language and some of the greatest literary works by the writing masters of the times with their students. But one of the very best was indeed Mrs. Helen Duquette. Little Ricky the Lad from Otter Lake Adolescent Adventures is a collection of 12 heartwarming and thought-provoking short stories that delve into the teenage years of the protagonist, Ricky, as he navigates the challenges and triumphs of growing up in Otter Lake, Quebec. Set against the backdrop of the late 1970s, the stories explore themes of friendship, love, understanding, forgiveness, and personal growth. Ricky's journey is grounded in the values and teachings he received from his family and the people around him. The stories cover a wide range of adolescent experiences, including bullying, young love, dealing with weight issues, family struggles, facing trauma, and finding one's identity. Despite the weighty subjects, each story is told with a gentle and loving touch that characterizes the Little Ricky way. Throughout the collection, Ricky's encounters with various teachers and mentors play a pivotal role in shaping his understanding of the world and his place in it. These relationships offer support, wisdom, and guidance, helping Ricky overcome challenges and make sense of the complexities of life. The stories also reflect on the power of community, empathy, and the importance of reaching out to others in times of need. Each story is a work of historical fiction, incorporating fictional plots and characters while drawing from the author's cherished memories of people and moments in his own life. From facing bullies with newfound strength to learning the value of compassion, Ricky's adventures highlight the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative impact of kindness. Little Ricky the Lad from Otter Lake Adolescent Adventures celebrates the universal themes of teenagehood while embracing the unique setting of a small village in Quebec. Richard J.M. Gauthier's storytelling captures the essence of this formative period, presenting relatable scenarios infused with a sense of nostalgia and authenticity. Through Ricky's experiences, readers are invited to reflect on their own journey of growth and self-discovery,